Hey everyone, Bitcoin is about $95,000 per coin, and I get asked now and then if I think Bitcoin will go higher. And the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. I think Bitcoin will ultimately go much higher than today. But the important thing is why. Why do I think Bitcoin will go higher? Because it's one thing to just think any asset will just go up. It's another to understand why it will go up and to have certainty about why it will go up, which I do with regard to Bitcoin, which is why I have 100% of my liquid assets that I own or control are in Bitcoin, as opposed to I have zero stocks, zero bonds, and almost zero cash, just enough working balances in bank accounts that if I write a check to a babysitter or something like that, it does not bounce in my bank account. Okay, so why do I think Bitcoin will go up from $95,000 a coin? Well, the answer is because only a very small percentage of the people who could benefit from Bitcoin already own any. And I'll explain what I mean by benefit. So for right now, worldwide, something like 5% of the world owns any Bitcoin. And most of that 5% has a very small percent of their total net worth in Bitcoin, meaning it represents a very tiny percentage of the total savings and investment of all the people that it could one day represent a large percentage of their savings and investment. So what problem does Bitcoin solve that these people have recognized that I believe the other 95% of the world will eventually recognize? And that is, you need a place to save your time and energy. Money, the concept of money, the technology of money, most of which is represented by the US dollar these days, is a way to save your time and energy for something you might want to buy in the future. If you knew for the rest of your life exactly everything you would want, then you could just have whoever pays you pay me in those products. So you might show up and rather than collect a paycheck, you get a blender, a pair of shoes, a new Wi-Fi router, and a bunch of other random stuff just delivered to your house every 2 weeks instead of a paycheck. But the truth is, you don't know exactly what you're going to want to buy over the next 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or 2 decades. You don't know with absolute certainty today what you want to buy. Otherwise, you could just set up your life with a payment plan for all of that. So what is money? Well, money is a way to store your time and energy so that you can spend it at a future time. And in order for money to do that job effectively, it needs to be scarce, meaning the time and energy you save up today to buy something ought to buy you as much or more in the future as compared to what it does today. In fact, it should buy you more in the future because in addition to saving up your time and energy, if you are willing to defer your consumption, meaning if you're willing to wait and be patient, then a good money will increase in purchasing power over time rather than decrease. So the money we use today has a fatal flaw, which is that humans control it. Humans decide how much money there is in the US dollar money system. And those humans who are at the Federal Reserve, although the influence of how much money there is much, as much controlled by politicians and political appointees and bureaucrats and all the people that typical people like to hate. Those people control the money, but technically it's actually controlled by the Federal Reserve, and they are influenced by all of these other forces. Well, those people are fallible, sinful people, just like the rest of us. And if you give them a magic money printer, they will find an excuse to use it. And never in human history have humans had the ability to print money out of thin air and resisted the temptation long term. Always, eventually, those humans come up with an excuse or some sort of panic or some sort of emergency that necessitates, they believe, printing vast quantities of money. So, for example, the total amount of money in circulation was something like $2 trillion before, I'm going to use round numbers here, something like $2 trillion before the Great Recession, and they made the decision that they should double that to roughly $4 trillion. And then after the great financial recession of 2008, when COVID hit, actually it really started in 2019, there was a lot of cracks in the system in 2019, the decision was made to double the money supply again from roughly $4 trillion to $8 trillion. And then there's different measures of it that run up as high as $22 trillion or $23 trillion. But the short take is every time the massively debt-laden, deeply indebted financial system we live in the United States, where the government itself is $36 trillion in debt, every time that system starts tottering on the brink and they start to get worried that people won't be able to pay back the money, they dump a huge amount of new, freshly minted, out of thin air money into the system to try to save it. And they will do that once again the next time there are more cracks in the system. And worldwide, that's already happening, although it has yet to happen in the biggest way in the United States. But it's coming. So everyone has a problem, which is they're trying to save up their time and energy so that they can buy stuff in the future. And the people who control their ability to do that, the people who control the value of their dollars, make up excuses out of thin air and print a ton more of that money, which devalues the dollars you already have. So instead of holding your purchasing power and enabling you to buy as much or more in the future as a good money does, instead your money deteriorates by between usually 4% and 9% per year. The government actually prints out of thin air about 7% more money every year, but that results, when it all trickles down, of your prices that you pay at the grocery store or for a bicycle or a used car or whatever it is, typically going up something like on average 4% to 9% a year. And then when you get bouts of high inflation, like right after they print a bunch of money, that inflation can spike up into the double digits, 11%, 12%, 13% for periods of time before they try to get it back under control by promising the world that they will not be so irresponsible and will not print so much money, which of course lasts for a short period of time before they do it all over again. And the Federal Reserve has been doing this since 1913 when it was created. So roughly 112 years ago, whatever that is, from 1913 to the present, they have been promising that this irresponsible money printing that they just did is the last time they're going to do it. And a few years later, they do it again. And then a few years later, they do it again. And a few years later, they do it again, and they will never stop. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's not really a problem because I'm saving up my wealth in my house. I'm making down payments on my house. And so I'm, immune from this government money printing. That has problems because your house devalues over time, your stocks devalue over time, your bonds devalue over time. And in my next video, I will go into all the details of why that is, but I will save that for the next video, which I will start momentarily here.